Hello and welcome to this video on the face. I am Tanya Chamberlain from the Division of Anatomy here at the University of Leeds, and I am here to guide you through the muscles of facial expression and the roles of the major nerves of the face. So let's get right to it. The face is probably one of the most characteristic and important features of human anatomy. It provides us with the main means by which we recognise others, and its role in direct or face-to-face interpersonal communication is second only to spoken word. We can signal more than 20 different categories of emotion just by selectively contracting and relaxing our facial muscles, for example. Our faces are distinctly different from those of even our greatest nearest relatives, being relatively small in comparison with the remainder of the skull, and more vertical in profile than most of the other African great apes, with a well tucked under anterior aspect of the brain case rather than being positioned somewhat anterior to it. Beneath its skin, muscles and other soft tissues, the face skeletal core is formed by 14 bones. This complex of bones houses parts of the digestive, respiratory, visual and olfactory systems. So it is obvious that the face is a complex but vitally important area of the body that is involved in an array of functions that are vital for life. We can't cover everything about it today, and we aren't even going to try. But you should have a better understanding of what lies below the surface of your face when we're finished. Of course, as we are looking at the anatomy of the face, some of the slides I'm going to show contain images of dissected human faces. So please bear this in mind and don't watch the video where people who may find such images shocking or distressing. Here is an image showing the bones of the face. Although the facial skeleton is made up of 14 bones, we only need to be concerned with 5 of them today. They are the mandible, the 2 maxilla, and the 2 zygomatic bones. Make sure you can identify these bones on this picture of the skull. The soft tissues of the face are arranged in a series of layers that are connected together and to the underlying facial skeleton by bundles of fibrous connective tissue called retaining ligaments. You don't need to know anything about these ligaments, but as we age, the soft tissues of the face begin to sag. The retaining ligaments cause lines or creases to develop as the soft tissues that aren't directly held in place sag more and more. To illustrate that the soft tissues of the face can be considered an integrated unit, let's look at an intermediate stage in a face transplant surgery. You can see that the soft tissues have been removed as a single piece, ready to be transplanted onto the reconstructed facial skeleton of the recipient. The outcome of this surgery is remarkably good, with patients usually regaining movement and sensation to their new face, often with a very acceptable cosmetic result. This integrated soft tissue unit has a very complex structure made up of a number of layers. The nature of these layers varies in different parts of the face, but as you can see on this diagram, the skin overlies a layer of fatty connective tissue, which in itself overlies a layer of muscles and fibrous connective tissue. The layer containing the muscles and fibrous connective tissue is called the superficial musculoaponeurotic system. The exact nature and distribution of the SMAS is still disputed, but the muscles it contains are well known. You can also see the retaining ligaments very nicely in this picture. The muscles of facial expression are a series of interconnected muscles that contribute to the SMAS. As you will have realised, they are the muscles that allow us to pull many different faces. These images show most of the muscles of facial expression. The muscles around the eye and the mouth have been removed in the right-hand picture so that you can see the underlying structures a little more clearly. In particular, you can now see the muscle of the cheek, the buccinator muscle, which is largely hidden in the left-hand picture. One aspect of these muscles that isn't clear from these pictures is how they merge together. It is often difficult to tell where one starts and the next one ends. This is most dramatic just lateral to the corners of the mouth, which are really called oral commissures. Just lateral to each commissure, several of the muscles of the facial expression blend together. As you can see on this image, the arrangement is vaguely reminiscent of the spokes of a wheel inserting into its hub. These hubs are called modioli, so one is called a modiolus, from the Latin for the word wheel hub. They are particularly important in relation to functional movements of the oral sphincter and are clinically important in aspects of facial surgery. Before we delve any further into the realms of the face, let's go and have a look at the learning objectives for today. After this lecture and with any further study, you should be able to complete these learning objectives. To identify the main muscles of facial expression in diagrams. To describe the function of each main muscle of facial expression. To give an account of the motor branches of the facial nerve. And to outline the role of the trigeminal nerve in providing sensory nerve supply to the skin of the face. I have divided these learning objectives into 3 parts for the purpose of today's video. And the first ones we are going to look at are the muscles of facial expression and their functions. So we've been putting it off, but now it's time to name a few of the muscles of facial expression and to think about what they do. We are only going to consider a few of the muscles. Their names may seem complicated in some cases, but they often describe what the muscle does. So when you learn the name, you also learn the function. The first up is the orbicularis oris. This muscle encircles the opening of the mouth, so orbiting the oral region if you like, and acts as a sphincter. Then we have muscles that alter the position of the oral commissures by moving the modiolus. These include the depressor anguli oris, the levator anguli oris, and the zygomaticus major. Hopefully, by considering their names or looking at their positions on the diagram, you'll realise that the first of these muscles pulls the commissure downwards, whilst the latter two pulls it upwards and backwards in the case of the zygomaticus major. Other muscles act to elevate or depress the upper or lower lips respectively. These include the depressor labii inferioris, which depresses the lower lip, the levator labii superioris, which elevates the upper lip, and the zygomaticus minor, which also acts to elevate the upper lip. The mentalis is the sulking muscle. It pushes your lower lip upwards and outwards. Sometimes it's not necessary to remember all of the names of the individual muscles around the mouth, as we can refer to these 7 that we have just covered as dilators of the mouth. The buccinator is a muscle of the cheek. Buccinator is more substantial than most muscles of the facial expression. It runs in the cheek, attaching to the maxilla superiorly and the mandible inferiorly. Here is a clearer view of the buccinator, with the orbicularis oris and the risorius, another muscle of facial expression. Buccinator is a surprisingly important muscle, playing important roles in suckling and therefore the survival of babies, and in controlling the bolus of food during chewing. Let's go and have a look at the learning objectives and see what we're going to look at next. So the next thing we need to look at is the facial nerve. So now you know some of the names and positions of the muscles of facial expression and have a vague idea of what they do. But of course they don't do anything unless directed by a motor nerve. The good news is that all the muscles of facial expression receive their motor supply from branches of the same nerve, the facial nerve. The facial nerve has many functions, not just to innervate the muscles of facial expression, However, the branches that go to the muscles have no other function. They are purely motor. The facial nerve emerges directly from the brain, and branches of it leave the skull via a variety of foramina and gaps between bones called fissures. As such, it is an example of a cranial nerve. We have 12 cranial nerves emerging from each side of our brain, numbered 1 to 12. The facial nerve is cranial nerve 7. Here we can see the branches of the facial nerve running anteriorly across the face to supply the muscles of facial expression. Remember that these aren't the only branches of the nerve by any means, and we'll look at the others at another time. These nerves emerge from the skull by travelling through the canal in the petrous part of the temporal bone. Just after emerging from the skull, they pass into the parotid gland, which is here. This is the largest of our salivary glands. The parotid gland lies on the side of the face just anterior to the ear. The facial nerve fibres don't do anything in the parotid gland, they just pass through it. However, if they are injured, they can have devastating effects for the patient. In this image, the patient was injected incorrectly with local anaesthetic and is temporarily paralysed. Fortunately, this will wear off in a few hours, but with some injuries to the parotid gland, the effects can be life-changing. The branches of the facial nerve innervating the muscles of facial expression are classified into 5 groups depending on the region that they supply. We have the temporal branches, the zygomatic branches, the buccal branches, the mandibular branches, and the cervical branches. In this image on the right, we could see a handy way, get it, to remember the branches of the facial nerve. We've covered quite a lot of ground today, so I'm only going to be very brief with the introduction of this next structure. This is the trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve provides the sensory supply to almost everything in the oral cavity, including the gingiva and teeth. However, this isn't why we are looking at this nerve today. As well as innervating the oral cavity, the trigeminal nerve is the main sensory nerve for the entire face, including all of the skin covering it and most of the cavities within it. Like the facial nerve, the trigeminal nerve is a cranial nerve, so it emerges from the brain and most of its branches pass out through foramina or fissures in the skull. Also, like the facial nerve, the trigeminal nerve has many functions. The trigeminal nerve, remember you have one on each side, has a large swelling just after it leaves the brain. This is the trigeminal ganglion, where all the cell bodies of the sensory fibres travel in the nerves are found. The trigeminal ganglion gives rise to 3 large nerves. They are called the first, second and third divisions of the trigeminal nerve. As the trigeminal nerve is the 5th cranial nerve, these are often referred to as V1, V2 and V3 because cranial nerves are generally numbered using Roman numerals. So the trigeminal nerve is cranial nerve V. The 3 divisions each have a name. The first division is the ophthalmic nerve. This passes behind the eye. The second is the maxillary nerve, which passes through the maxilla to supply the central portion of the face. And the third is the mandibular division. The division and their branches are shown in green, orange and blue. Each division of the trigeminal nerve provides sensory innervation to a particular area of the facial skin, as well as the deeper structures. Here you can see the fields innervated by the 3 divisions. You may wonder why this is relevant, but in clinical application, the trigeminal nerve function is assessed during the cranial nerve exam by stroking these 3 regions of the face. So there we are. We've looked at the skeleton of the face, the layered structure of the soft tissues, and the muscles of facial expression. We've also looked at the role of the facial nerve during facial expression, and the role of the trigeminal nerve supplying the skin sensation.